In an article recently published in New York Magazine, Alice Hines details the incel and their obsession, supposedly, with plastic surgery. And of course, it's been making the rounds on Twitter and drawing very, very typical, very predictable responses. There's basically a few things that happens. First, she tracks down specific people who comment on forums. She notes that some of these forums like PUA Hate and Lookism have a registered 10,000 users. Now, of course, if you know anything about the way the internet works, the number of registered users doesn't really tell you the level of engagement of any particular online community. It's just kind of a top-end number. Of course, the vast majority of such accounts are going to be dormant, as is the case on any forum. But what's interesting is that even these anecdotes of people that she seeks out to kind of make a case study of, she reveals at the end of the article that the guy hadn't used his account in over a year, and that she tracked him down and confronted him about it. And then he said, "Oh, no, that's not me." And then later said, "Well, I kind of left that behind and I don't really think that way anymore." But this is the guy that she's using as kind of this poster child of what an incel is. And she uses these same kinds of techniques later on in the article when she references Alec Manassian and Elliot Rodger and claims that there are several mass killings that are all related to incel and, quote, other related man-hating groups. So, of course, she doesn't really expand upon that because she is being deliberately vague in order to really, really pump up this whole narrative that incels in general are so hateful and vile and dangerous. And, the overall angle is, of course, that people shouldn't have any sympathy towards them whatsoever. And this was something that, surprisingly, Lauren Chen on her new show, Pseudo-Intellectual, which I just have to know it's a terrible name for a show. I mean, it's an okay name for a show, I guess, if the point of your show is to, expose people who you think are pseudo-intellectuals, but that's not the point of her show. That's, literally just the name of her show where her and her, boyfriend or fiance or husband or whatever, her boy thing, her and her boy thing, talk about stuff, which is fine. I think that they seem like perfectly nice people, but why would you name your show Pseudo-Intellectual? It just makes it look like either you are the pseudo-intellectual or your guests are pseudo-intellectuals. It's a weird name for a show. Anyway, she's generally a pretty nice and pretty reasonable person, but I thought that their take on this was actually kind of remarkably pointed, and that there was not a lot of sympathy. So what I'm going to do here is go through some of their episode here, and I just want to throw out some basic gender flips on this. I feel like it's low-hanging fruit, but once again, this is something where everyone's really dogpiling, but when you take a step back, you realize what level of society we're in. We are just multiple levels deep in society, and we need to talk about it.
So according to this one article that's been shared a bunch on social media, incels are now turning to surgery to fix their looks. It's by, I think it's, The Cut. How many bones would you break to get laid? Incels are going under the knife to reshape their faces and their dating prospects.
It was actually a pretty good piece of journalism too, I think. That was pretty good
I was surprised.
Yeah.
And
I was impressed.
There were some promotional tweets and posts that I think weren't very well done, but I think we have to remember that a lot of the times the actual journalist who wrote the piece often isn't in charge of marketing headlines and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, probably most of the time.
Yeah, I would say most of the time too, but the actual piece is pretty well done, because I think a lot of people, especially in the media, they don't really know what an incel is.
No.
They just think that's anyone who's ever been on 4chan.
This journalist actually was a little bit able to understand meme culture too.
Yeah.
Because the incel culture is like a huge kind of meme thing.
Yeah,
so,
Chads and Stacy's.
Right.
Yeah.
Although it goes on and on. I mean, they messed up Blackpill a little bit, but I gave him a pass.
Yeah.
It really wasn't a good piece of journalism. Like I said, it's really taking very select anecdotes as a sort of case study, and she's doing it with an agenda. The agenda is, of course, to promote this narrative that incels are basically these dangerous, radicalized people. And she actually eventually builds up to the idea that they should be denied these plastic surgery requests because she sees it as coming from a culture that is so just hateful towards women that literally the incels should not be allowed to change their face. She ramps up to that implication by the end of the article, and then when she mentions that the doctor she's interviewing checks her and says that's ridiculous, she basically closes out the article by saying, oh, well, he just wants money. Like, it's actually terribly biased and ridiculous how she went about making this article. But the thing on black pill she actually got right. Black pill doesn't really have one static meaning. If you're talking about a subject, to be black pilled in regards to that topic, it refers to just a general state of hopelessness. So she actually got that
So,
right.
I mean, the I guess point of this article, which is actually pretty long and pretty in-depth, is that now incels are actually getting surgery in order to improve their dating prospects. So I have a lot of things to say about this. We did a video a while ago about plastic surgery, and I just want to put this out there. Like, if you want to change something about yourself, you should have the right to do that. I'm like, no one has the business telling you what you should or should not do.
And what I'm wondering is why that can't be the end of it. That seems to be just about the end of it when it comes to women getting plastic surgery. You know, now you'll have some people who make the same kinds of arguments, but they get a lot of pushback, right? They say, how dare you assume that all women who go get plastic surgery or wear makeup are shallow and superficial? And you wouldn't dream of mocking and ridiculing them. Certainly you wouldn't associate them with, like, violent terrorism. And very often people will look at these women as victims too. So I wonder, you know, if we're just going to take a libertarian stance of like live and let live, I wonder why that can't be the end of it. And I think the answer is pretty obvious. It's just a social dogpiling. Incels are weird. They're icky. They're an outgroup. They're someone that we can all make fun of. And then it makes people feel better about themselves. And I really think that it's that level of just like childish bullying that's in play here. And I guess what bothers me about it is that it's set up as this like deep social commentary that's somehow aimed at helping people when really it's just picking on people who are really at their lowest and are kind of at the lowest socially just in general.
But at the same time, I think with incels, like, I'm not going to say that looks don't matter. We did a whole video about the way dating, or the way looks affect dating, and I think a lot of people got kind of triggered by it, but didn't actually watch it, because I very much say that looks do matter. I'm not going to pretend that they don't, but at the same time, I think incels are under the mindset that if you're ugly, you're screwed. Can never get a girlfriend. Yeah. Which is not true, because ugly people, they date. Ugly people find love. Yeah.
I've seen multiple videos where people that are fully physically handicapped have,
significant others. Beautiful girlfriends who are not only like gorgeous, but also like taking care of them. So it's like, I mean, if these guys can find love and seem really happy with their significant other, maybe the problem isn't just your looks. That's all I'm saying. Yeah.
And generally, there are some fair points here. Of course, speaking generally, you know, a lot of this kind of makes sense, but what's happening here is they're really kind of expanding the conversation beyond just ugliness. Because, you know, a lot of people who might have like a physical disability, that doesn't mean they're going to be unattractive, right? And these kinds of counterexamples they're bringing up, you know, do we really think that the man who's ugly is bringing just like nothing else to the relationship compared to this beautiful woman? He's probably producing things. You know, the women are probably playing off of hypergamous instincts. So one aspect of incel that's being completely ignored by this article as well as like in this conversation is that it's not that these incels just feel like they can't get a date because they're ugly. It's that they're ugly and then they're also extremely socially awkward and they're also not very wealthy, especially because they tend to be so young. So they're kind of close to understanding the larger dimension of what's going on here, but they're not really approaching it from a genuinely sympathetic angle, because I still maintain that their number one goal is to kind of mock and ridicule them. And that's why they're missing this really obvious glaring
I think
point.
to me the biggest thing that I would see, and I don't have some kind of dark art knowledge of the female psyche or something like that, but these people seem incredibly bitter, unconfident. Like they would talk about when they make contact with people's eyes. Like it's a rare occasion for them, right? When they decide to look someone in the eyes, it's like, okay, well,
Like this is rare enough that I'm actually noting this.
exactly.
As a,
So it's like, wow, this is a terrific gem of a person. I'm sure they just have a really good aura about them.
and that
I think that it's really sad that some people seem to perceive that others avoid eye contact with them really consistently, and that when a person does make eye contact with them, it's something that they do remember. And I think that for people who like are kind of ugly, they really do remember like kind of small humanizing acts of kindness like that. And I think it's really sad and a little bit kind of sick the way that they're taking that as a signal of that person's deficiency. They're saying this person's lack of recognition and like lack of having any kind of concern for them, they're twisting that into that person's character flaw. So, I don't want to pass the buck completely onto society. I do acknowledge that there's a degree to which, a lot of what incels promote in these communities is probably not very helpful, and that there's probably more constructive ways they could go about things. But I don't think anybody's really disagreeing with that point. At the same time, recognizing the fact that beauty matters, recognizing the fact that the way a person looks affects things, that's one step that, even many others won't take. So to their credit, at least they're acknowledging that much. But how can we expect to actually solve this problem if we're not willing to examine the way that these men have been treated? It's really conspicuously absent, and I think it's just really sad.
Too bad, because it's like, I think it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you have
Yeah.
low self-esteem, you're not successful with women, and then that kind of like reinforces the idea that, oh, I can't get a girlfriend, and then you just kind of get stuck in this rut of
Yeah, it's self-defeatist. It
yeah,
really is.
exactly. And I think like Joe Rogan, he's talked about incels before, and he kind of mentioned that the problem is maybe that they're just going for women out of their leagues, because
Part of it, I'm sure.
yeah, there are femcells. I've learned through my internet research, which is like female incels, girls who claim that they can't get dates.
Femcells aren't real. Femcells doesn't real. 0% is that a thing.
And it's like, okay, if there are guys and women who are both saying that they'd be willing to date anyone, but no one's willing to date them, someone's lying.
The self-identified femcells are lying. It's not that hard to figure out.
That's all I'm saying. Like, someone has set the bar too high and isn't willing to stoop to that level, which is fine. You should have standards when it comes to dating, but then I think you need to realize that maybe the problem is your standards versus just like all women being awful. And again, I want to reiterate, I understand that looks are somewhat of a barrier to dating. Okay, I'm not dumb.
So she set up this conundrum where it seems like it's either the femcells or the incels, or I suppose some combination of both, that must have standards that are too high. And it seems like she's implying that the incels are the ones who really just got to lower their standards.
Now, one of the things that really puts me off and kind of throws my empathy entirely out of the window for these guys, it's the idea that I think that they're all very kind of reductive materialists, and they're really hedonistic, right? Like, it's not just about getting like a significant other for a lot of these people that you spend time with. Like, so these people hate women.
Yeah.
A lot of them really do hate women, but they also worship these women at the same time.
Yeah, it's like they hate them, but they're mad that they're not interested, like that women aren't interested in them.
And they hate chads.
Yeah,
but
who are able to get women.
Yeah, they're the attractive male counterpart that incels believe life is very easy for.
And as usual with their point, they're not totally wrong, but when you take a step back and you look at this, you have them completely basing their self-worth on female validation and female approval, and it seems like there's not enough being done to really combat that and to really question that underlying narrative. What we have here is the male mirror to female baby rabies. You know, women who hit the wall at age 30 and are childless tend to develop baby rabies, and yeah, they get made fun of to a degree, but I think there's also, at least they're afforded more sympathy than the incels are. Can we at least argue that they should have that level of sympathy that we can afford to like childless older women, particularly ones who are misled by feminism? It seems like there's a lot of parallels there. But I don't really believe that they had much sympathy or really care or concern in the first place. And I think that this angle of rhetoric is just kind of designed to ease their conscience, because I think they know that they're basically just bullying here. I don't think they're actually trying to be constructive. They're kind of just dismissing any of these claims, and I think that they're really deliberately avoiding the root of the problem.
You know, it's all about sex to them. It's all about just being super, what do you call it? Hypergamous? No. Yeah, hypergamous, I think.
Kind of, and just
but-
like hedonistic.
Yeah,
I think we need to stop and reflect upon the fact that they're both commenting on this subject. They're commenting on like a gendered issue, and neither of them know what the term hypergamy means. Just think about that. And I think that really kind of makes sense of this entire conversation that they're having.
People have been making fun of them for this. Some people are saying that there's a double standard in play. Like, incels will judge women based on their looks all the time, right?
Yeah.
So a Chad is what they call like the good-looking guy, and I think a Stacy is what they call like the quintessential like good-looking girl who they would probably say is a whore sleeping with all these Chads. But like, you're absolutely judging people on their looks, and then you're going and kind of like trying to reinforce these same superficial standards. Like, and again, you can do whatever you want with the way you look, but I think you should have a little bit of self-awareness there.
Yeah.
I think that if incels could choose to have beauty not matter, then they would choose that. I think that they're recognizing as just a fact of reality that it does. I don't think that they're implying that that should be the case for at least many of them. And I think that's what would be required for it to really be hypocritical. And when you look at it in that light, I think that the resentment kind of makes a lot of sense. Not to say that it's justified or that it's like a good thing, but you can kind of understand where they're coming from. And I don't understand why this is so hard. Also, you know, the real double standard is that if you criticize women for their hypergamy, for their tendency to marry up, for their tendency to gold dig, you know, Donald Trump made the grab him by the pussy comment, and we're never hearing the fucking end of it. So yeah, of course there's a double standard in play there. If we were going to be truly equal about this, you know, we would shame women who are materialistically shallow to the same degree that we are shaming these incels. And we would have the same level of compassion and concern for people who want to go ahead and make these choices, the same respect for those choices as men and for women. But apparently that's a really radically unpopular stance. And I suppose it's unpopular when you take an article like this, which is clearly designed to promote a narrative that is fear-mongering to make women the primary victims of war because there's an incel in every basement and they're coming to get you. You know, if you actually take that seriously and consider it good journalism, then yeah, I guess I can see how a perspective that's more laid back and live and let live and a little bit more compassionate seems alien to you.
Not very sympathetic to incels. Someone named Bob Chipman says, yeah, no, I've decided that shallow, looks-obsessed bros being psychologically victimized into cosmetic surgery, hell, and abject self-loathing by the same market forces they willed into being to foist onto women for centuries is both hilarious and justice. So yeah, there's kind of like the potential element of hypocrisy about people who kind of like, I don't know, judge others based on their looks, but they're also willing to undergo the same surgery.
I think it's weird that she doesn't know who Movie Bob is, even though she's featuring his tweet here. But I also find it bizarre that she doesn't see the glaring problem with his argument and the way that they're trying to package this bizarre thing where it's like, you recognize that beauty standards matter, therefore you're a hypocrite for not just accepting your fate. I don't think they really thought that through. And like, I know that Lauren is like Chinese, but I mean, you're supposed to be like a right-wing person. Presumably, you defend free markets, right? Presumably, you're a little bit anti-communist, right? I mean, let's take a look at this Bob Chipman tweet. It's actually kind of a hot mess. So the underlying implication he's working with, one of them, is that people who go to get cosmetic surgery are dealing with psychological victimization. It's a total hell, right? And he was recognizing the females as legitimate victims of this, but these boys are just shallow and looks obsessed. And it's like a poetic justice in his eyes because these young men somehow are responsible for what he calls the market forces that have led to this. So, first of all, it's a service. It's a service people get. It's a service people get because there's a demand for it. The beauty industry didn't create this demand. They simply filled a demand that was there. So this idea of like advertising being more important than it is just a reoccurring theme among these stupid commies. And it's just a way of them to basically deny the agency of people in order to say that, everything is the fault of these big evil corporations because I can't control anything by myself. But then the other part of it too is that there's this blurring of linear time where somehow these men are responsible for the entire market existing. To me, that it seems like wouldn't they be victims just as much as the women? So I find this tweet to be extremely just perverted and callous and ideologically twisted. So thanks, Bob Chipman, for really showing the true face of tolerant, peaceful, humanitarian liberalism. You guys are you're a bunch of fucking monsters. And I've kind of come down pretty hard on Lauren and her boy thing here, but this is why I don't feel bad for it. And maybe that's just me doing what I criticized them for, which is, I was being mean and then I found my excuse later on. But, I think that this should have been pretty obvious that you prepare this tweet to show to people and it doesn't strike you as having any problem at all, that he's just putting all of the agency onto the market and blaming that for everything. Yet at the same time, these incels are also, getting their just comeuppance. How come the women aren't also dealing with a hilarious injustice or a hilarious justice,
Agree.
Feels like a lot of projection going on.
A lot
right?
of projection.
But I do want to add an asterisk to all of this, and that is that I think from reading the article, I think that especially the ones that look to undergo cosmetic surgery, a lot of them probably do have some form of mental illness, like a legitimate form of either body dysmorphia. Particularly the main focus of the article seemed like he would undergo the knife very regularly for facial reconstruction all the time, and then redoing the facial reconstruction.
Yeah.
It was actually 2 of the incels featured. Actually, any of the ones that this person actually spoke to that got these kinds of surgeries got them repeatedly. The article also talks about how body dysmorphia is something that's thrown out there as a diagnosis at incels, and they argue much more flippantly as a way of diminishing their concerns, whereas for women, that wouldn't be considered abnormal. So there was another kind of sexist double standard there. And this was one of the things that the writer of the article was kind of pointing to as an avenue for preventing incels from having access to this kind of surgery. So, but yeah, I mean, no shit, Sherlock. Of course they have mental issues. And you basically just spent this entire conversation like making fun of people who are like ugly and retarded. And that's really all that was. That's kind of all that came down to. And I don't think there was any real effort to address one of the crucial underlying problems, which is that we do put a lot of pressure on men, particularly straight men, when they have to, try to go out and date. And there's not a lot of sympathy when they have trouble meeting someone. And then it turns out that whenever there's a question of if someone's standards are too high, it's always the case that men are the ones who are seen as people who need to lower their standards more. And what I'm going to show at the end here is just a series of tweets where people say things like that well, these men should just treat women better and should just really, really do more for women. And then, if they grovel enough, then for sure they'll find someone that's good for them. And the idea that maybe they could deserve better, or maybe that you don't have to have a standard that's as shallow, that this shallow standard that they're so willing to judge these incels for having. There's no serious conversation about challenging that, really. So ultimately, I think the best solution is love dolls. We need to give them love dolls, and we should stop being such obnoxious and mean cunts to these people, because it really is punching down, and it's really despicable. And I'm really tired of seeing all of these just mobs on social media that just go after the person who's clearly the loser at their lowest. It's so stupid and boring and predictable, and it really shows kind of the ugliest part of people's nature. I think that we can afford to have a little bit more compassion, and that ultimately that would be a lot more constructive.